Hello, so we are at week 8, webcast 4 for InDesign 1, and as I've mentioned previously, we are working through several webcasts that are focusing on multiple objects and transformations. This webcast will focus on aligning objects, which I just noticed that I misspelled. So anyway, aligning objects, and let me move over to this demo file and let's get started. All right, until the time when InDesign introduced Smart Guides, the align command had to be one of my absolute favorite commands. It was so powerful right from the get-go, and it just got better and better. Of course, many of us who have been working in Illustrator had been waiting for certain features to appear in the align panel, and they did over time, and in fact we just got the latest one in CS6, and I'm thrilled because it kind of got messed up in CS5 and they completely fixed it and gave us the ability to mimic something that we've been able to do in Illustrator for a very long time. So that was very exciting. I'm going to go through a couple of different methods of aligning and distributing objects using the align panel, but I just want to remind everyone that if you're in a current version of InDesign, as far back as I think even CS4, we were given the ability to use our Smart Guides to help us align objects. So let me just zoom in on these 4 objects here. As I move an object, if my Smart Guides are on, you can see that when one object approaches another object, certain guides are going to automatically appear on the page to help me decide if this object that I'm moving is now in line, either top aligned, bottom aligned, or center aligned with another object on the page. And because these two objects, this thinner rectangle versus the fatter rectangle, are the exact same height, that Smart Guide showed me a green guide going across the top, the center, and the bottom, telling me that all 3 of these now align. Now as I move this guide, this particular rectangle down the page, I can see that I have a pink guide that has just appeared underneath it. And from previous webcasts, you know that what's happening with the pink guide is it's telling me from a page alignment standpoint, this is now bottom aligned to the center of the vertical page. And if I move the center point down, I see another pink line telling me that the center of this object is now vertically aligned to the page on the right. And let me just move it, there we go. And now I move it slightly to the right, and now it's telling me that this object is centered vertically and horizontally with the page itself. The little green guides are telling me where that alignment falls between multiple objects. And as I move this around, you can see that little green lines stretch out to tell me that now it's aligning to the blue box over on the right. It's now telling me that the center of this rectangle is aligned to the left edge of the largest and rightmost red circle that's sitting above. So on the fly, I'm really getting quite a bit of feedback, helping me determine whether certain objects are in line with other objects. But there will be times where you have several objects that you need to work on alignment, and to move them one by one is just not efficient. So this is where the align command, the align panel, comes in extremely helpful. And you can see we've got several commands in this align panel. Going across the top are the align commands, align objects. Below that, this entire area in the middle portion is for distributing objects. And then down at the very bottom, though we've had this for quite a while, it is one of the newer features. This allows you to distribute using spacing. And as I get into the distribute commands, I think it's going to make a lot more sense why we need this little panel down here at the bottom. All right. First off, let's just talk about some of the alignment commands. I'm going to grab these stars down here at the bottom, and let me zoom in just a little bit here. Let's just quickly go through these different align object commands. So the first icon, if you hover over the top of it, you should get a tooltip. And as with previous webcasts, sometimes CCC Confer lets me see my tooltips, and other times they are non-existent. Right now on my system and on my second monitor, they are non-existent. So you'll have to trust me unless you're doing this with me. So the first one shows two objects with a vertical line on the left. And I think these are pretty intuitive as you work your way across this field. We've got align horizontal centers, right edges, top edges, vertical centers, and then bottom alignment. So let me just click on each one to give everyone a real quick response to what's going to happen. So I'm going to align all these stars to the left, which in fact is what it did. Center. I am pressing Control-Z or Command-Z on the Mac for each one of these instances so that we can get the stars back to the way they were, so everybody gets a fresh view of what this command will do. Moving to the third icon, Align Right. And one of the things that I want you to notice here, because we just assume this for the most part, is that when it says align to the left or align to the right, it's choosing the leftmost object to align to the left, and then it's choosing the rightmost object to align to the right. And what about the center? How is it figuring out how to align these to the center? Well, it's taking the distance covered from the leftmost object to the rightmost object, and it's saying, all right, within that distance, I'm choosing a center point, and that's where I'm going to align all of these stars. So when I click on center, you can see that it pretty much just split the distance between the leftmost and the rightmost objects. The exact same thing is going to happen in a vertical space. So again, I'm going to look at the top of that orange star. That's going to be the place that by default it's going to align to the top. Vertical centers, it's going to split that difference. And then bottommost objects, notice that all of these stars aligned with the green star because it was the one that was sitting to the lowest position in this selection. And why is it even using this selection to figure out how to align objects? Again, we will probably just assume that that's the case because that's how it works in most programs. It doesn't really matter what the program is. If it has any type of graphic capability and alignment capability, our expectations are that it's going to take the selection and use the pieces in it to determine how to align things top, left, right, and bottom. But we also have an Align To option, which shows that we have several different areas that we could align an object to. Currently, the default is that it's going to align, whatever command I choose, it's going to align within the boundaries of this selection because it says Align To Selection. We'll talk about the key object in just a moment, but let's move on to some of these others real quickly. Let's take this star, this orange star. It looks like it'll stand out quite a bit. And I'm zooming out so everyone can see the page. And I'm going to change the Align To from, instead of Align To Selection, to Align To Page. And I just want to double check that. My check mark is now sitting excuse me, to the left of Align To Page. Now going back up to this alignment set of commands, I'm going to say I want to vertically and horizontally, so horizontally and vertically center this star to the page. I'm going to click on the horizontal one first. We can see that star is in fact, from a bird's eye view, it looks pretty close to the center, and I'm sure it is, but from our eyes we can judge that it's either there or gotten very close. And then I'm going to click on the vertical center, and now I know that this star is centered both horizontally and vertically to the entire page. With this star still selected, I'm going to change the alignment to margins. And in this case, nothing's going to change too much because I happen to have the same margin all the way around. So if I click on center and center, it's not going to move. But let's say that the right margin was larger than the left margin, and I can make that change really quickly here. I'm going to go out to the Layout command, choose Margins and Columns, and for just this one page, I'm going to make the outside margin, say, 6 picas instead of 3. Immediately, I see this distance increased on the right side, and it's real easy to see that this margin is definitely not the same as this margin. So with this star still selected, I'm going to go back to my Align command, just double check to be sure that it's still set to margins, and I'm going to horizontally choose the alignment, and notice that that star now has moved slightly to the left because it's now taking the distance from the left margin to the right margin and placing it exactly in the horizontal center. So if you're ever working in the Align panel, as many of us have had happen, and all of a sudden the thing that you think you're aligning goes crazy on you, the first thing you're going to want to do is come back over to this Align to and make sure that it is in fact aligning to what you thought it should be aligning to. And like I said, by default, when you first start out, it's aligned to selection. But after that, it remembers what you have selected. So 3 hours of work may go by, and you come up here and you say to yourself, oh, I need this orange square to be aligned to, let's say, this green one. And I say center, and they both move over to the center or off center of the page, and you're thinking to yourself, wait a minute, what happened there? Well, the last setting you had was aligned to margins. So thank goodness we have the undo command, because now I can just undo that. I'm also going to undo the position of that orange star. And I'm going to change this back to align to selection. Okay, let's talk about distribution now. Distribution is a very popular thing that we want to do. We have multiple objects and we say to ourselves, oh, I really want these objects to be spaced evenly across. And that's what I'd like to do with this set of ovals. And I want to show you why some of the distribution commands are not going to give you the result you think you're going to get. Let's first start with this set of rectangles. And then we'll move over to the circles. And the reason I'm starting with these rectangles is they all have the same width. So the first thing I'm going to do is vertically center them. And then I'm going to go down to the, actually let me do that differently. Let's just start going through these commands, and then I'll back up and show you something else. Noticing this looks really small on my second monitor, so let me zoom in a little bit. Hopefully this will help. The first one is to align distribute the tops. And to make sense of this, you have to think of the boundary area that this selection has created. It's going to use this selection area to determine what is an equal distribution of the tops of these rectangles. But it has to fit within this boundary, the top of the topmost and the bottom of the bottommost. And I'm going to click here. And sure enough, if I stair step down, let me just grab a guide for each one of these. Okay, we can see that these definitely are, the tops of these are stair stepped in even distances progressing from the top to the bottom. I'm going to undo that. Oh, let me back up for just a second here. And now let's distribute their centers. We get a very similar pattern, and the reason we're getting a duplicate of functionality is because the heights of these boxes are all the same. Let's try the next one, which is the bottoms. Again, we get a very similar effect. These are our left sides. And we can see now we have 1, 2, 3, 4. what may not be making sense right now is that they still look like a blob of a mess, and that's because we have distributed them, but before we did that, there was no sense of alignment to these objects. Let me go to the next one, which is to distribute their centers. And then one last one, distribute the right edges. Let's go back now, align their tops, and let me pull some of these out just a little bit so that we have some uneven space between them. And basically just getting the alignment set up. So at this point, these objects, though they are aligned top, bottom, they definitely do not have an even amount of space between them. So I'm going to select them, and let's just choose the distribute vertical spacing. And they all moved over, and I know for a fact now that each one of these spaces is equal. Let me do that again. But let me make it a little more obvious that these are definitely off. I hope you guys picked up on that. As I drag to the right, we can see my smart guides kicking in. Right there, it's telling me that the space now between the green and the red is the same as the red and the orange. And as I move this to the right, it'll snap at some point and tell me that the distance on the left of the green rectangle is the same as the distance on the right of the green. But I want all of these to be the same. Again, I'll click on the distribute, and I get this really nice clean spacing. Of course, the only movement it can make is between the leftmost and the rightmost boundary. It's not going to include the page or the margins or anything else because my align to is still set to selection. I feel like this example makes us think that the distribute command is going to give us what we need each time. But this is actually a fallacy because in this case, the only reason this is working the way we had hoped it would is because the widths of these objects are all the same. I'm going to move down to the set of objects that I created here, and I'm going to first vertically align them. And now let's take a look at some of these commands, left edges, centers, and right. And let's use just to start off, let's use the same command we used in those previous squares. When I click Align Centers, I get a very different result. And the reason I'm getting this different result is because InDesign has been told that it is supposed to distribute the centers. Well, that's exactly what it did. It took the center of this one, and the center of that one, and this one, and this one, and look at the stair steps. They are completely even. But from a design element, these things are not distributed at all the way I would like them to have been because they're not horizontally similar. The same thing's going to happen here with these circles. I go ahead and say, okay, I want you to distribute. Let me just align the tops real quick, bring this down, and then say distribute centers. And the fat ones, or the fatter ones, are actually starting to touch and overlap where the smaller ones have a much greater distance between them because we're aligning from center to center to center to center. And if I undo that and choose right edge, I'm still getting this kind of unpredictable look here. I mean, it is predictable, but visually it's just not appealing. All right, so that brings me to my next point. This is when often what we want to do is we want to distribute using spacing. And I actually tend to not use this. I tend to use this one down here at the bottom. What I'd like to do is have these circles distributed so that each one, regardless of its width, has the exact same amount of space in between them. So I'm going to first vertically center them, and then let me move some of these over so we definitely see a difference here. Now I'm going to go down to the bottom portion of my align command and choose distribute using spacing. And then I can dictate how much space do I want between each of these objects. And maybe 1p6 might be a good one. And it's probably going to push this out over the top of the rectangles, but that's okay. Once I've put in the amount of space I want to see between each one of these objects, I need to choose whether that's going to happen horizontally or vertically. And I really like to change the space between them horizontally. So I'm going to click on this icon, and now all of them, regardless of their width, have 1.5 picas between them. This is really close to a little over 1/4 inch. Let's undo that. And let's try now the vertical one. And you can see that it has now stair-stepped these so that if I measure the distance between the bottom of this circle and the top of this, and then I move down to this one and to this one. Oops, got to change that a little bit here. There we go. Oops, wrong way, wrong way. Sorry about that. There we go. We can see that each of these distances are exactly the same. Let me pull that back out. All right. And we have another really interesting tool, which I believe we got this in CS5, and it's called Live Distribute. If you have a set of objects that already have the same distance between them, so let me change this to something like P6. Okay, so I've just distributed the spacing between these to be exactly 1/2 pica, and move this down here. But now I've decided, oh, I really would have liked that spacing to increase just slightly, and I'd like to do it visually. I don't know what that number is going to be. Live Distribute will let me grab the right edge of the selection and drag the distance between the distance between each of these objects. Now don't forget, you need a keyboard equivalent to go along with this drag, because if you don't, we all know what's going to happen, right? It's going to stretch out each of the objects proportionally within the selection, which is what we talked about in a previous webcast. So I'm going to undo that. But this time, as I start to drag, I'm going to hold down my space bar right after my mouse button goes down. And as I drag, look at what's going on. The objects are keeping their exact same size and proportion, but the space is increasing or decreasing between them. Now if I grab these objects here, these rectangles, let's see what happens. And the reason we need to put our mouse button down when you guys try this at home is because the space bar turns the selection tool into the hand tool. Remember that from one of our beginning webcasts? This is how I can move this page around. I'm trying to do this slowly so you guys can see this refresh in the second monitor here. So I'm going to press my mouse down, hold the space bar, and sure enough, it is working, but it's not making the spaces even, but it is increasing the space proportionally. And there may be times where that's exactly the effect you're looking for. You have several objects that have a different set of spacing distances between them, and you just say, I want to increase this just slightly because this element, the spread from this element to the right side of this element has to be, let's say, this far. Oops, and I just used my Shift key instead of my space bar. There we go. So that's called Live Distribute. You are going to need that space bar. Okay? All right, the brand new thing, new feature we have in CS6 has been a long time coming, and we are thrilled with this, absolutely thrilled. And that is that we now can assign a key object. So to do this effectively, let's use these stars here. Let's first distribute the spacing between these. There we go. And let me zoom out a little bit, and I will shrink these proportionally. There we go. And then we'll zoom in. All right. From what we just mentioned, if I select these, 6 stars here, and I say I want to align to the top, the expectation is that it will take the topmost object and align everything to that top star. And as we just went over, if I click on the Align Bottom, it will choose the bottommost object and align. But what if I wanted all of these stars to align to this yellow star? Well, how am I going to do that? I would probably have to put these other items down below so that the yellow star would be the topmost item that I could align to the top. But that's a lot of work, and that's not how we want to do this. So I'm going to select these, and once the selection has been made, and I hope this is coming out on your screen, you can see that each star here is selected. It has a little blue trail going around it with little resize handles, and then everyone should see the bounding box, the selection box, indicating that all of these have been selected. This only works with first a selection, and then you make a second click on the object you want to turn into a key object. This comes directly from Illustrator. Any of you who are taking Illustrator or have taken Illustrator, you know about this feature, and they're calling it the same thing in InDesign, thank goodness, because it's really a drag when they change the names of things when they go across the applications. And I'm going to click once on that yellow star. Notice that its outer edge has become this thick blue edge. Now why is it blue? It is blue because these objects are on a layer whose color indicator is blue. But if you had it on a layer that was its indicators were red, it would turn into a red, thick, bounding edge. And the important part of this is that one of the items, whichever one you click on to make the key object, is going to have this thick edge telling you, okay, you have selected this as the key object. And now when you align to the top, the 3 stars on the left moved up, and the 2 stars on the right moved down. How cool is that? This is such an awesome feature. I can't tell you the times we've had to work around this to get this back. And the other thing that by clicking on that a second time, notice that the Align To has changed from selection to key object. And we see this little tiny key symbol inside the Align To area. This is going to come in so handy because it's going to work with the distribution tools or the little icons that we use. It's going to be used for alignment, for spacing. It's really going to be handy. So everyone, please practice this. I want to say one last thing about distributing. If you have, let me get these back here. If you distribute a set of items, and let me just select these two and make a copy of them real quick. And I say that I want to distribute. Notice that nothing really happens. For distribution to really have an impact, you need to have 3 or more objects selected. So when you're practicing, just be sure that you've got at least 3 objects selected. Okay, in this case, it's very easy for us to just drag that one object, use our smart guides, and figure out what distance we want from the other one. But it's when we get into multiple objects, which is what you're going to need to do for your, is it Bodhi? I'm trying to remember if that's the right word for that. The name Bodhi, it had the little stars across the bottom. Well, in our next webcast, we're going to learn how to copy, different ways to copy items and then to do a series of copies and paste automatically in the background. But once those are created, you may need to go back and align them. And what we're talking about today is going to give you the tools to do that. All right, let me just check my notes really quickly. I want to be sure that I've covered everything that I plan to. One of the things I did not do was at the very beginning of this webcast, I did not talk about where I can find the Align panel if it doesn't happen to be showing right now in your doc. So remember, the home for all panels is the window menu, and Align is tucked underneath another panel, and we keep changing this over and over and over. But if you go, what is that, a little more than halfway down to Object and Layout, you'll see that the Align, Pathfinder, and the Transform, which we'll be talking about later in the week, are all there underneath this secondary menu underneath Object and Layout. When you bring up the Align panel, it's usually stuck with the Pathfinder command. And you can dock both of them together, or if you want to, if right now you're not interested in the Pathfinder, you can drag it off of the Align panel, close it, and then you have the Align panel by itself docked over here on the right. And if you want Pathfinder, after you've done something like this, you'll go back to the window menu, Object and Layout, choose Pathfinder, and then you'll need to redock it by dragging its title bar or its tab name, placing it over the top of the line, because it'd be nice to have both of these in the same panel group. They work nicely together. And in this case, it placed it in the same group, but I don't like the fact that Pathfinder's on top. So as you all know, we can just place our cursor on a line and drag up, and it swaps places. Okay, until the next webcast, which will be copying objects, signing off.